Tomball, Texas to order. We will dispense with the opening ceremonies of the pledge, but we are going to have our opening prayer with Pastor James Clark of First Baptist Church to pray now, since he has a commitment right after this. So
Thanks, Mayor.
everybody stand to pray.
Let's pause and pray. Father, we love you first and foremost, and we're grateful for everything you do in our lives and all that we've experienced out of your grace and your mercy and your love that is constantly with us. And in my opinion, part of that grace is the joy of living in Tomball. Love our city. We love those who work for our city, those on staff, and those who work so diligently in every area from public works to administration. We love our council. Thank you for the privilege of living in a free country where we have the choice to pick our council, pick our mayor. We are a part of that process, and we're thankful to be a part of that process. Bless this city. Bless those who are a part of it and have lead it. Bless this meeting tonight. Help them with the first meeting. Help them with the council meeting later. Let your wisdom reign, and know above all things we're always grateful. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. At this time, anyone will be allowed to speak on any matter other than personnel matters or matters under litigation for length of time not to exceed 3 minutes. No council board discussion or action may take place on any matter until such matter has been placed on the agenda and posted in accordance with law. Is there anyone who would like to speak on any issue now? We will also have this on our regular city council agenda when we complete this meeting. Doris, do we have anyone signed up? We have no one signed up. Okay, having no one signed up, we will move on. We're going to enter into a workshop to receive presentations by representatives of the following PID consultants regarding public improvement districts. Public improvement districts are one of the funding mechanisms that the city uses to assist developers in financing part of the projects, since we, as a council, have not allowed MUDs coming into the city. So, all right, who's first?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This presentation was put together by our consultants for our bond council as well as cash bids. So I'm going to actually turn it over to John Snyder with P3 and well, everyone else. Or I'm sorry, Jason Hughes with P3. John didn't. No, John is here. We're all confused. Sorry.
Mayor Council, I'm John Snyder with P3 Works. We're the city's PID administrator for your bonded PIDs. We also have Julie Partain with Bracewell, who's bond counsel. Joe Morrow and Jason Hughes are your financial advisors with Hilltop Securities. And then we also have Scott Bean with Haas Hill, who's administrator for the cash flow PIDs. So PIDs are governed by Chapter 372 of the local government code. So it is specific to the state of Texas. There's a whole lot of rules that go into it. For the bonded PIDs, you also have to deal with federal tax regulations on top of the state issues. So a couple big picture items. The biggest one is probably what the mayor just mentioned. PIDs are not political subdivisions. So unlike a MUD, the city council is the de facto board of the PID. So you're not going to have a separate board or entity out there making decisions that has an impact on the city. They're highly lucrative in terms of getting items that the city's wanting, whether one of the big issues has been annexation in recent years. So in return for getting the PID, oftentimes you're seeing developers voluntarily annex. And then you can also have PIDs be used to forward the city's comprehensive plan. So that's anything from parks and trails or thoroughfares, anything that maybe a developer wouldn't normally be able to fund by themselves. They can help offset those costs with the PID. So the PID's it's a defined area within the city or the city ETJ. It has to be contiguous. And ultimately assessments are levied within benefited properties. So anything like parks, trails, streets, are not going to have an assessment on it. And ultimately, the assessments can be paid in full, or you can pay them off in annual installments. I would say, based on my experience, it's probably 99% of the folks pay it in annual installments, but occasionally you do have somebody that prepays. There's no cost to the city, so all the administrative expenses are included in the annual installment. So I mentioned the city benefits. That again, annexation is the big one. The city, you can't use the PID to pay for something that doesn't directly benefit it. So oftentimes oversizing is what's negotiated. The PID will pay for the portion that's benefiting the PID, and then the developer agrees to fund oversizing that also is benefiting the city as a whole. Other things you might see are amenity centers, schools, playgrounds, those type of things. Sorry, it's a little small. I need to look at my copy. Okay, so in terms of the obligations, the city really has a few primary obligations. The biggest that it has, especially with bonded PIDs, you covenant to levy the assessment each year, levy the installment, and collect it. And furthermore, you agree to pursue delinquencies and foreclosures if needed on the property. So really, it's once the bonds are sold, it is a debt and it needs to be repaid. And so the city's covenanting that it'll do whatever's necessary to repay that debt, short of paying from its ad valorem general taxes. So nothing that would impact the city, but in terms of foreclosing or using any of the assessment revenues, the city agrees to do everything it can to collect the assessment revenues according to the bond documents. So this is a slide. I can ultimately, if you have questions on this, I can let Hilltop come up and explain the financial implications, but big picture, it's non-recourse to the city. It's not impacting the city's bonding capacity, not impacting its ad valorem rates, so really no impact to the city residents. It does count against your bank qualified debt limit. So if you were issuing less than $10 million, that would have to be taken into considerations, but there's ways to offset that. This is a list of, it's fairly inclusive. I'm sure I've missed a few, but this is a list of folks that have issued PID bonds in the state of Texas. You can see it's ranging from City of Austin and Travis County all the way down to, I don't know what the smallest on there is, probably City of Lago Vista or City of Ponder, something along those lines. So it's everybody from 2,000 residents all the way up to City of Austin or Travis County or Fort Worth. In terms of number of deals, you can see before 2007, there was 0 bonded PIDs in the state of Texas. But then for the next 12 years, it ramped up with $1 billion being sold, over 140 sales. I would say over that 12 or 13 year period, probably most of them occurred after 2015. And then you can see from 2020 to 2022, it actually doubled. So it's significantly ramped up. I think a lot of it probably had to do with SB2 in terms of limiting how much taxation could go. Cities are trying to find a way to finance other infrastructure. But overall, you can see now we're over $2 billion of bond par in 250 transactions. In terms of the term, I know that was a question that had come up at the last council meeting. For bonded PIDs, the big red portion there is bonds that had a 30-year term. On the slide, it shows up as 26 to 30 years. And sometimes they typically will levy an assessment for 30 years, but maybe there's a year before bonds are issued. So it'll show up as 29 years, but it was really a 30-year assessment. So you've got probably 90% plus that are either 30 years, and there's a few that are at 35 years. In terms of the impact of what a 30-year bond versus a 15-year would do, this is a admittedly very simplified analysis. On the left, if we kept everything constant in terms of the assessment per unit, the annual installment for a homeowner, if we wanted to fund $30,000 of infrastructure, it would go from $2,000 per unit to almost $3,000. So it'd be about a 33% increase. Conversely, if we said we want to keep the annual installment the same, then our assessment per unit goes from $30,000 down to just over $20,000. So it'd have an impact on the amount of proceeds that could be funded. This was added in just to show some of the items from the city's approved PID policy, which was approved in March. I think on the next slide, it was minimum of 50 acres, Value Lane of 3 to 1, and then a maximum bond term of 30 years. And lastly, this is a slide showing active PIDs, whether it's a cash flow PID, bonded PID, term, equivalent tax rate, and any other data. So that's really the end of the presentation. I know I went quick. If there's any questions on legal issues or financial issues, we've got everybody here to answer them, and we're happy to answer questions.
All right. Is there any questions? This is a workshop. Council have any questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next.
Mayor and Council, that was the end of the workshop that we had planned. Again, there's going to be considerable amount of PID items on the agenda, so that's why just a refresher about. And then I'm hoping that our consultants can stay for that in case you have quite specific questions for when we have those items come up.
So there will not be another presentation from Bexar Hilltops and Osceola right now.
They were all combined into that one. So if there were any questions for the bonds or legal, they're all here to answer questions. Okay.
In the past, have PIDs ever caused damage to cities? In the past, not now. I mean, they say they've got it all, but I thought there was some PIDs up in Arlington or somewhere up north that caused the rating.
Mayor, Council, Jason Hughes, Hilltop Securities, again here with Joe Morrow. Councilman, to my knowledge, no, I do not know
None
of
in
any,
Texas.
none that I know of. So as John said, this is really a financing vehicle that's become more common within the last 7 years or so. But to my knowledge, and certainly not with any of my clients, no, there's not been any kind of negative consequences from having the PID specific to a city.
And if a developer goes under and that it can never come back to the city.
So the city is the issuing arm, and that's again under Chapter 372. The other thing I would tell you is there are a number of things that are put into place to protect the city, whether that's limiting the amount of the assessment that can be put on property, whether that's limiting the amount of the overlapping tax that's on there, things of that nature. So there's also a reserve fund in the case of a bonded PID. So there's a number of things that we try to do to protect against that. The other thing I would say too is whenever PID bonds are issued, the nice thing about that is you're not simply handing the developer a check. All of that money goes to the trustee. And so the developer has to put the infrastructure in the ground. The city gets a chance to inspect it before it's conveyed to you. And that's at the point in which the developer is then reimbursed. So again, there's a number of safeguards that are put in there, both from a legislative standpoint, as well as from your finance team here tonight. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? And I don't know if you'll be able to answer it.
Yes, sir.
Or maybe one of your other people. But why does some developers use PIDs and some do not?
Let me give you my personal opinion. Understand I'm coming at it from your fiduciary, right? I'm obviously not on the developer side. Non-PID development districts, your MUDs, freshwater supply districts. One of the main differences there is A, it's a separate governmental entity, and two, the developer maintains a lot of control. Absolutely, the city has to be part of that in the sense that whether it's a development agreement or something like that, you enter into that. But the developer, generally speaking, retains more control. The nice thing about a PID as the city's financial advisor is you control everything. You levy the assessments, you issue bonds, you foreclose in the event of non-payment of assessment. So you have all of that control. My personal experience is you have some developers that are accustomed to using PIDs. I've had a couple of times success where developers have wanted to use a MUD or something like that and haven't used a PID in the past. And we've actually been able to sit down with them, say, a PID makes sense for both you as well as the city. Other developers that I've talked with will just say, look, we don't want to be wed, for lack of a better way of putting it, to the city for that long. We want to go in, we want to get our development agreement. We're going to go issue our bonds. We have our private financing, and we know that we can do that very efficiently. So I think it's all, you know, the one thing I've been working on PIDs now for 6 to 8 years. And the one thing that I've learned is every single development's different, right? And something that works for one developer may not work for another.
Well, another question, since you answered that came up, you said that the city would foreclose.
Yeah.
Who
So
would
this-
we foreclose against?
You would foreclose against a homeowner for non-payment of assessment.
That concerns me even more.
That's what.
Now, remember,
Okay.
you're doing that for taxes though, too. In
Well,
general,
taxes is one thing, but a PID, first of all, I will say to everybody in this room, I've voted for 15-year PIDs. I will never vote for anything higher than a 15-year PID. It was never told to me that we would actually foreclose. I have issues with that. I'm just getting to the point where I'm not comfortable with a PID at all.
well,
So,
that is absolutely council's, I apologize, go ahead.
Yes. Councilman Townsend?
Yeah, I'm kind of bamboozled here as well. There's no cost to the city other than we have to foreclose. There's a cost involved in foreclosure.
mhm.
And that sounds like that's something we have to do as a municipality, is to go through the court places and take care of that. But we also assess it, we take care of it, we manage it. There is a cost to the city. But this is the first, and I've been on council 14 years, stating that we have to be worried about the foreclosure process. That leads me down the path of not wanting to be a member or a part of the PIDs either, of having any more PIDs, period.
Can you assess that?
Yes, ma'am. So again, John Snyder with P3 Works. So there's a contract with Harris County Tax Collector. So it's actually a line item on the tax bill. And through that agreement, they agree to go through the foreclosure process. So any fees associated with that are recouped actually through the foreclosure process, and it's all handled through that agreement. So that part, there's no cost. In terms of the ongoing administration, there's a separate line item on the bill that is, it's included, it all rolls up, so we don't have a bunch of items on the tax bill, but part of that is for the administration to pay for any fees, whether it's our fees, legal fees, trustee fees, dissemination agent, any of that is all covered. And then there's also a $60 a lot fee for city time that's collected annually. And so there is no expense to the city. Nothing should be paid from the general fund ever on any of these bids.
Well,
Mayor, could I have a
but
question, please?
We are paying for it because our name's gonna be after the ones that go after. Such as if they pay their property tax, but they don't pay their PID assessment, we're still as a city going to go after them.
So
Because who's gonna file the lawsuit against the homeowner for not paying?
the tax collector is serving as the agent. And this is where Julie Bertain's probably going to kick me. What I'll tell you what state law says, and it says that ad valorem property taxes are superior to assessments. In practice, I've seen if a property owner, if they get a $10,000 tax bill and they pay 8,000 of it, I've seen it, and it hasn't really happened, but from what we've been told is they say our system, we just want to do it pro rata and everybody gets paid, and then they'd be foreclosing on behalf of all the entities. That's how I've heard it from the tax collectors, how they would do it in practice. So far, the economy's been great. We've never foreclosed. We administer over $1 billion of assessments. We've yet to foreclose on a property. And a lot of it just goes into as Jason said, there's the tax stack, there's the value to lien. And so is somebody going to not pay an assessment of $1,000, which would be $1,000 a year is probably a $15,000 total assessment when you've got a $300,000 or $400,000 house backing that up. And even if the homeowner doesn't do it, the bank steps in. We had one case where a developer got in trouble. And so he couldn't pay his assessment because he owned all the lots, and the bank stepped in and paid it and got a new developer in the project.
Okay. Councilman Farr?
Yes, because it sounds to me like if we're foreclosing, we become a property owner and a property manager.
No, so
So
Let's remember-
from a legal standpoint. So let's remember, you have a PID where you can pay the developer back annually pursuant to your reimbursement agreement. I have not seen yours. Most of the time, those reimbursement agreement also require foreclosure. Otherwise, why would a developer enter into it if he couldn't get paid, right? When you have a bonded PID, remember what you're saying to the market, we're going to sell a bond and it's backed by the assessments levied on all of the property owners. The ultimate security for those bonds is the assessment, right? So if you're a bondholder and you're going to buy that, what do you want to make sure of? You want to make sure that you get your money back, right? So we have some procedures in place to make sure that the assessment that goes on the property And the value of the property is such that if you had to foreclose and sell it at the courthouse steps, you'd make enough money back to pay off the tax lien and pay off the assessment. And that's the bondholder's ultimate security. You can't do a bonded PID without a commitment to foreclose. Nobody would buy the debt, right? Now, he's right. I've only seen one time where I had a developer who, for whatever reason, couldn't develop. And ultimately, the bank stepped in and did it. Otherwise, people may pay late, just like they do with taxes. We have a delinquency fund for that so that we can bridge the gap so that we don't have to worry about not having enough money. I will say, you can decide to do what you want. Your policy is your policy. If you just want to do 15 years, that's probably just a cash flow PID. It would be very, very difficult to bond a 15-year PID. Your assessment will be way too high for anybody to pay at the numbers we're talking about, paying the developers back. For a developer, I will say another benefit of a PID versus a MUD is you get your money sooner. When you have a MUD, you have to put a certain amount of value on the ground before you get reimbursed. You can get money sooner back with the PID, which is a big incentive to a developer, and it would be an incentive to get something you want in return. I always tell cities, if you're going to do this as an accommodation to a developer, then you should get something back. Get a development that you wouldn't otherwise get just with zoning. Get something better than that. Get something that you like. And that doesn't fit every development, nor does it fit every developer, but it can, and it can get you a better, higher quality development than you would otherwise. And that would be the reason to do it if you wanted to do a PID. I wouldn't just do it for every developer. That doesn't make any sense. But foreclosure is key to that. And you're right, foreclosure is a lawsuit. You would do it just like you do taxes. But unlike with taxes, a lot of times city will foreclose. Not foreclose when they could, because sometimes it's just a small amount or they wait till it builds up. You wouldn't have that luxury in a bonded PID. You would have a commitment to the bondholders that you would go ahead and foreclose. It's the same process though. You use your same tax collection attorney. The fees are paid for through the process. We have an administrative component to the assessment that also pays for it as well. It's the same process. I've never personally seen an individual homeowner foreclosed on. Most of the time, people don't just pay one and not the other. It's possible, but I don't normally see it.
And there's also in the documents, there's typically a 5% threshold. So if you're a property owner that owns more than 5%, which is typically you're either a home builder or the developer, then if you miss your payment, there's no messing around. You move straight into saying, you give them the notice and say, we're moving forward on foreclosure. If it's an individual property owner, they're generally allowed quite a bit more time. I know we have delinquency reports we follow up monthly, and we've got a few that are still delinquent on 2021 assessments. I don't know that the county's pursuing anything, but if it goes beyond, at some period of time, the county does catch up. But I know a few counties run, even 2 years behind on foreclosing on it.
I just hate to see the city become a resolution trust corporation.
That's a fair point. I've not seen that happen. Obviously, you would sell the property at foreclosure, and it is a disclosure item in the offering document for the bondholder where we say, yes, we commit to foreclose, but we can't promise you that the property would get sold at, on auction. But I've not seen that happen yet.
Should we have, an economic downturn for whatever reason?
Sure.
And the values drop out of the market,
Yeah.
and people lose their jobs.
So to give you an idea on it, so there's a 3-to-1 value to loan. So if we were going to issue $10 million of bonds, there'd be a $30 million value. The debt service on that $10 million of bonds would probably be in the neighborhood of $700,000 to $800,000. And so it would have to be substantial, because what you're foreclosing on is not the $10 million, you're foreclosing on the annual installment of $700,000. So we're talking having an appraised value of 30 million, asking the open market, is anyone to buy it for 700 and not having a buyer. We just haven't seen it. There's a similar vehicle to PIDs in California, Nevada, Arizona, Florida. When 2008 hit, those markets got tested and there was always buyers, and the bonds. There's a few in Florida that went into default, but it was few and far between. And the Florida law is more similar to MUD, where it was a developer controlled board and they weren't necessarily wanting to foreclose on themselves. So I think that the PID statute is pretty well written in terms of those protections.
What infrastructure costs do the PIDs cover?
Your normal, you do water, sewer, parks, roads, other amenities like that, playgrounds, stuff like that. I would say the majority of improvements that we see are going to be water, sewer, road, park, green space, open space, detention, drainage. That would be the normal things that we see.
Okay, my next question. I live in a subdivision that does not have a PID. So in my lot cost, I had all those costs included in that price when I purchased my lot. Then I built my house. So now I have X amount of money into my property. But right down the street from me is a subdivision that has PIDs. So when they do comparisons, home comparisons for resale value, things like that, they look at my house, they look at that house down the street. How do they do that comparison?
So, yeah, from how I understand they do it is they go and they do pull comps in general. From our experiences, if you have a PID, if you had two identical properties, you had property A and property B right next door to each other. One of them had a $20,000 assessment, the other one didn't. I'm buying one without the assessment, unless there's something real superior, right? It's got all the amenities, the landscaping's unbelievable. It's a place where you really want to be. Then maybe I'm willing to pay for the same
But
price.
The house that doesn't have the PID, are they assessed at a lower rate because the home that had the PID was sold at a lower rate?
I don't know the. I don't know if
Basically,
it's
is
sold at
a
lower
PID a
rate.
detriment to the property value?
I don't,
No, I think,
I don't think so.
I think the property value is, again, I think in general, PIDs are highly amenitized. And so in general, they're nicer communities is again, in my experience, usually it's master plan communities and projects that have either good amenities or they were doing something where the city was coming to the developer saying, we've got major infrastructure needs. The developer will say, this project cannot afford to pay for whatever those infrastructure needs are. And the PID's a way to help offset those costs.
yeah, I don't think the assessment itself, it's just like your taxes don't figure into your home sale price, right? But in the theory, your theory is that if I have a better, more highly amenitized development with a PID, because could that home value be higher? I guess it could. I don't know that that's really the way appraisal districts look at those kinds of things. I mean, they
Yeah,
wouldn't
because
know.
nobody's ever been able to answer it for me. I
Like-
asked many experts like yourselves that have come over here 13, 14 years now. Nobody's able to answer that.
Well,
But there's
keep
a
in mind
lot
that
of
you
people in this
can't-
community who don't have a PID on their home. And so how is that affecting their home prices?
What do you think it's affecting the home prices?
I think their homes are not being appraised higher because they're being compared to homes that have a PID on them where they were actually sold at a lower price. Because they didn't have to incorporate the infrastructure cost into that lot, which would drive that cost of that home up.
So are we saying they're being saved taxes because their houses are priced lower, or you're saying they can't sell the
Well,
house?
it depends how you look at it. If you're looking at it paying taxes, yes, you're saving money. But if you go to sell your house, you're not getting out of it what it should have been worth.
Well, I think it would be hard to compare except an initial build out. I mean, obviously, when a developer is going to put a subdivision next with a PID next to a subdivision that's not, he can't raise that price substantially or people wouldn't buy there, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it can be amenitized, but people only pay up to a certain amount for amenities, right? So at some point, you can't overprice yourself with the market, which is one of the things we put in the development agreement. We try to make sure that whatever the total tax stack is, including assuming the assessment is a tax, that it's in line with other developments. But as far as how that translate 5 years down the road, when you go to sell when you get an appraised value and you think your value should be higher or lower because there's a PID next door, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if this
Is a lot of what's driving this actually the price of the land, the raw land itself? To where you can't, you're not getting the spread between sales price and cost?
I think it's probably everything from land to developers need to make a return in order to attract investors to invest in the projects, and with material costs and land prices and everything else. I think that's part of it. One thing I did to address Councilman Stoll's question. So going back to where you said you bought a lot. If I owned, again, I'm going to use the example of House A and House B where they're equally amenitized, everything else equal, they're selling for the same price. Except for now I've got a $10,000 total assessment on House B, no assessment on House A. In order to sell House B, I'm going to have to reduce the price, right? And so now I'm going to have to sell it for, if I was buying a house, I'd say it needs to be $90,000 if you're selling, right? And then because the $10,000 is still there, that's still the cost that's with the land. It's just a financing mechanism, but you paid for the same $100,000 of land and infrastructure costs in House A and House B. It was just House A, you funded it all with your loan or with owner cash, and with House B, it was 90,000 with the loan and $10,000 with the PID. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Well, no, it does, but, each CAD uses recent home sales for their valuations. And so you have a house in a subdivision with a PID that doesn't have all the infrastructure costs included in the lot. So HCAD is looking at that, since they use recent home sale values, as this is what the value of that area is. Well, then the area that the guy paid, or the woman paid, all the infrastructure costs for their lots, and that, if they're using home sale values, then, from a tax standpoint, they're actually paying less. But when you look at home sale values, and realtors and that are looking at comps on where we should price the home, unfortunately, they're having to use homes sometimes in subdivisions that have a PID where they don't have all the costs of the infrastructure included in that lot price.
That's a fair point. I don't know the answer. I will say that in theory, though, your lots that are inside of a PID may not have all of the same infrastructure costs, but if you're using the PID as a development tool to get a more highly amenitized development, then you're going to have more private amenities. You're going to have more of a community center or a amenity center and a pool and stuff. Those are the kinds of things you should get with the PID. So those costs would be wrapped into the cost of a lot. So whether that evens out, I don't know. But in theory, that's why you wouldn't give a PID to just anybody that was just going to develop under zoning and do plain Jane, right? You would want to do something more highly amenitized so you get value. So the developer is not paying for the infrastructure, but he's having to pay for that other stuff that makes the development more attractive.
yeah, a lot of our, again, just speaking from our experience, a lot of our PIDs are the highest priced new home communities in the cities that we work in. That's typically and Jason, I don't know if you'd agree with that, but that's typically what we see is the most expensive homes have the special fund, whether it's a MUD or a PID or any of those vehicles, they're able to amenitize them, and those amenities are driving the price up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. We're going to then close the special city council meeting. I need to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second,
Second.
do we take a vote or I a vote? Verbal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Okay. We are adjourned. Okay, we will go straight